burn all this empty tape on my phone. So.
Hi, I'm great. How are you? All right, good morning, everyone. We're going to get started in about 2 minutes. There'll be 4 speakers today. United States Attorney Andrew Luger, ATF Special Agent in Charge William McCrary, FBI Special Agent in Charge Michael Paul, and BCA Superintendent of Investigations Scott Mueller. Each of the speakers will give brief remarks. We will take questions at the end. If you could direct your questions to the appropriate one of the 4 speakers, that would be helpful. U.S. Attorney Luger is going to announce some cases today that have been recently charged. You will get all of those materials after the press conference in a press release. So I just wanted to highlight that. And I think that's it. Is the volume okay? Okay, great. So we will get started in just a moment.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks. Good morning. Thank you all for coming here. Today I am joined by our law enforcement partners to announce a joint federal strategy for combating violent crime in Minnesota. I'm Andy Luger, and I am the recently confirmed United States Attorney. As you know, violent crime is at an all-time high in the Twin Cities and much of the state. I started as U.S. Attorney 5 weeks ago, and combating violent crime has been the focus of my initial days in office. I want to start with a basic principle that I think all Minnesotans can agree on. Every Minnesotan deserves the right to live safely and securely without fear of shootings, carjackings, and violence. We do not, in my view, say that enough. Everyone deserves to feel safe and secure. It is the duty of law enforcement working with prosecutors like my office to ensure the safety of all of us. That is our job. In 2022, the right to participate in the life of our community in safety is being eroded, and this is simply unacceptable. We cannot allow this plague of violence to continue. Therefore, we approach this task with urgency and have joined together to provide leadership to combat violent crime. Today, we are announcing a strategy that significantly increases the role of federal law enforcement and the U.S. Attorney's Office in the fight against violent crime. And we are announcing a first wave of charges against violent criminals in our state as part of this new strategy. In the coming weeks and months, we will announce additional federal charges that will bring justice for victims and their families and take violent criminals off the street. This approach that we'll talk about today is deliberate, focused, and designed to meet this moment for our community. A few years ago, most of us never used the term carjacking. A few years ago, there were so few carjackings that law enforcement barely even tracked the crime. Everything has changed. Now they happen in broad daylight and with premeditation. Carjackings are often brutal, threatening the lives of victims. In 2021, there were over 650 carjackings in Minneapolis alone and over 100 in St. Paul. A few years ago, shootings were too high, but not at a record-breaking pace. Today they are. The victims of carjackings, domestic disputes involving shootings, and gang-related violence will live with the memory of their horrifying experience for years to come. This cannot continue. The need to act is urgent. So what are we going to do about it at the federal level? First, resources. You cannot have an effective strategy without the resources to carry it out. Therefore, I am refocusing my entire office around the effort to combat violent crime. Starting now, every prosecutor in the U.S. Attorney's Office will handle violent crime cases. Our lawyers will specialize in a variety of matters, from cybercrime to narcotics to investment fraud, and that will continue. But each prosecutor will handle violent crime cases in addition to their other work. Every assistant U.S. attorney is now a violent crime prosecutor, and this includes me. I am handling violent crime cases as the U.S. attorney from indictment through sentencing, and I am in the process of hiring additional prosecutors who will join this fight. Second, carjacking. Not everybody knows this. It is a federal crime to engage in carjacking. Because our office primarily prosecutes adults, starting today, if you are 18 or older and engage in a carjacking in Minnesota that involves violence or the threat of violence, you will face federal charges that carry stiff sentences. Police, federal law enforcement, and the BCA will bring all adult carjacking cases here. And as long as they fit our statute, we will prosecute them under federal law. Defendants who are convicted in this building for a federal carjacking case will serve time in federal prison. Third, shootings and gun cases. Because every prosecutor in this office will handle violent crime cases, we will substantially increase the number of cases involving the possession and use of illegal weapons. Like carjackings, federal gun prosecutions carry severe sentences. Many of the shootings in our cities and surrounding areas involve people who are prohibited from possessing a firearm. If you have been convicted of a felony and possess a firearm, you are violating federal law. You are also violating federal law if you purchase a gun for a felon, a crime called straw purchasing, and you will be prosecuted here. It is that simple. We already prosecute many illegal gun cases in this office. Under this new strategy, we will prosecute far more. Fourth, gangs. Gangs and gang activity are at the root of many of the shootings and violent crime in our state. We have formed a gang prosecution team that is working with our law enforcement partners to focus on the violence that's been carried out by gangs and gang members. They meet regularly and are focusing on the most violent offenders in our community. Fifth, auto sears and privately made firearms. In recent years, violent criminals have exploited the use and accessibility of devices such as auto sears, commonly referred to as switches, that convert pistols to fully automatic weapons. They are also trafficking in privately made firearms, also known as ghost guns. These devices are far too easy to make or to buy. Simply possessing a switch is a federal crime. We'll hear a little bit more about the switches from ATF, but our strategy includes prosecuting violent criminals who possess switches and traffic in ghost guns. This strategy is designed to bring swift justice to our communities and to victims of violent crime. But it is also designed as a signal to violent offenders to stop. As I said earlier, this plague of violence cannot continue. We cannot normalize shootings, carjackings, and other instances of violence as part of our daily lives. It is causing too much fear, too much pain, and too much heartbreak for families and our community. Now, before discussing some of the cases that we're bringing today, I'd like for our law enforcement partners to talk about the strategy. First, Will McCrary, Special Agent in charge of the ATF. Will?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Luger, and thank you all for being here today. My name is William McCrary. I am the Special Agent in charge for the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, St. Paul Field Division. I oversee the law enforcement and regulatory operations for the state of Minnesota, the Dakotas, and the Western District of Wisconsin. I have been in charge of ATF in St. Paul since September of last year, and in the time that I've been here, I have seen our special agents work very closely and tirelessly together with Minnesota BCA, Minneapolis Police, St. Paul Police, Hennepin County Sheriff, and many, many other jurisdictions. And I can say without a doubt that our agents are ready and enthused about working alongside U.S. Attorney Luger and his team on this violent crime initiative. We have already identified numerous violent offenders throughout the Twin Cities and other key areas of Minnesota. The full support that the U.S. Attorney is announcing here today will help us secure prosecutions needed to remove these violent offenders from the streets and away from the hardworking people of our communities. The cases we have already been working include very serious offenses. As the U.S. Attorney mentioned previously, felons and other persons who are prohibited from possessing firearms still sometimes manage to circumvent the system and acquire one or more. There should be autos here, images.
Yep, there they are.
There they are. Okay. Those are images on the back of that firearm. Those are auto sears. Now, imagine a shooter who illegally possesses a firearm, and the firearm that he or she is using has an auto sear like that equipped. As you can see, a shooter who illegally possesses a firearm, and the firearm that they're using sprays bullets at a rate that is so violent that the person using it can barely control the gun. That is an auto sear, commonly referred to as a switch. They've been an increasing problem here, and they make dangerous individuals even more so. That pistol with an attached auto sear was handled by an ATF agent, a trained professional at a closed range. Imagine what the result of that would be in the hands of an untrained individual looking to settle a score or a grievance, which is an all too common occurrence in the areas where gangs operate freely. We have in ATF and will continue to identify those who are manufacturing, distributing, and possessing auto sears. ATF is able to accomplish a lot of our successful police work through the use of our crime gun intelligence resources. Among those are ATF's National Integrated Ballistics Imaging Network, otherwise known as NIBIN, and with that we match ballistics evidence from scenes of a crime, recovered at crime scenes, to other scenes where we also collect evidence. When that firearm is eventually recovered, we are able to link the crime scenes together, which can often provide evidence and clues needed for successful prosecution. Currently, Minnesota has 3 NIBIN machines that can be used to process NIBIN ballistics evidence. They are located at the Minneapolis Police Department, the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, and the Hennepin County Sheriff's Office. If you would like more information about the NIBIN system after this, please feel free to reach out to my PIO, who will get you more detailed and more in-depth information. I would like to show you one last image. That is a heat map that our Crime Gun Intelligence Center put together with the help of the Minneapolis and St. Paul police departments. This map shows areas of firearms activity in the 2 major metro areas. That is just short of 1 month of activity. Areas of red, orange, and yellow are high activity areas for shots fired, and the yellow exclamation marks are areas with linked evidence such as NIBIN connections that I just mentioned. We use this information and information like this to help identify the area's most prolific shooters. We are hot on the trail of many individuals who seek to do violence and of those who arm them, those who deal in the illegal firearms trade. ATF is here to be a resource to all of our state, local, and federal partners, including those who are standing here today. When we all work together, we accomplish more. And we look forward to working with everyone on this violent crime initiative. Thank you again, Mr. Luger, for your leadership and your determination to address this growing problem. Thank you all for your time. I will be followed by FBI Special Agent in Charge Michael Paul.
Thanks, Will. Good morning. My name is Michael Paul. I'm the Special Agent in charge of the FBI's Minneapolis Field Office, which serves Minnesota and North and South Dakota. Law enforcement partnerships are as strong as ever across the state of Minnesota, and the FBI remains committed to those partnerships. With renewed support from our new U.S. Attorney, law enforcement across the state is looking to strike back at violent crime and the other criminal activities that are threatening our communities. The FBI is specifically leveraging its Violent Crimes Task Force and its Safe Streets Task Force in the fight against violent and criminal gang activity. Our Violent Crimes Task Force partners with the Minneapolis Police Department, the Eden Prairie Police Department, and the Hennepin County Sheriff's Office. This team continues to remain focused on violent crimes, including carjackings and Hobbs Act robberies, that is, robberies that affect interstate commerce and involve the threat or use of force or violence. Carjacking is borderless. It's a flagrant crime that can affect anyone at any time in any place. And you can see here maps depicting carjacking incidents over the last year in both Minneapolis and St. Paul, and the significance of the issue that we face. Following a violent crime, carjacking spree throughout the Twin Cities, Jeremiah Ironrope and Chris Ann Benjamin pled guilty to carjacking, particularly an incident in Richfield, wherein Ironrope pointed a sawed-off 12-gauge shotgun at the victim and demanded the keys. He later admitted to 4 other carjackings across Maple Grove, St. Paul, and St. Louis Park. Those involved either the use of a gun or a physical assault. His partner in crime, Benjamin, admitted to an additional 2 carjackings. This case included investigation by the Minnesota State Patrol, the Minneapolis, St. Paul, Maple Grove, Richfield, Edina, and Roseville police departments. Iron Rope was recently sentenced to more than 15 years in federal prison, and Benjamin was sentenced to more than 8 years in federal prison. Marlo Carson was recently sentenced for a Hobbs Act robbery that involved a retail store in the Cedar Riverdale neighborhood of Minneapolis. During that robbery, Carson shot the store clerk point blank in the chest, killed her, and fled. This case was investigated by the Minneapolis Police Department, the ATF, and the FBI, and Carson was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison. In another task force Hobbs Act investigation, Derek Lee Spielman perpetrated a robbery spree that victimized 7 Twin Cities businesses, including 4 gas stations, 2 liquor stores, and a restaurant. During those robberies, he used a handgun, pointing the handgun at employees to threaten them, to intimidate them, and order them to the ground. In a number of cases, he racked the slide of that semi-automatic pistol in order to further intimidate folks as he asked and demanded for cash from the registers. This investigation was conducted by the FBI in close collaboration with the Minneapolis, Fridley, Brooklyn Center, New Hope, and St. Paul police departments. Spillman pleaded guilty to 7 counts of Hobbs Act robbery and 1 count of brandishing a firearm in the commission of the crime of violence, and he was sentenced to 21 years in federal prison. Those who choose to commit these violent crimes will be identified and they will be held accountable. The Safe Streets Task Force is another multi-agency team led by the FBI, which specifically addresses violent gang activity with a particular focus on sustained proactive investigations targeting criminal conspiracies and group activity. Our task force partners here include the Minneapolis Police Department, the Minnesota BCA, DEA, the U.S. Secret Service, and Homeland Security investigations. A significant Safe Streets Task Force investigation recently resulted in the indictments of 7 violent individuals in Minneapolis. The investigation stemmed from increased gang activity, violence, shootings, and murders near the Chicago Avenue and Franklin Avenue areas in South Minneapolis. The investigation has been led by the Minneapolis Police Department with contributions from the ATF, the BCA, and the FBI, as well as assistance from Homeland Security Investigations and the U.S. Secret Service. Current charges include carjacking, drug trafficking, illegal possession of firearms and ammunition, and possession of a machine gun. But our work is not yet complete. 2 additional individuals were indicted just last week, and investigation continues in that matter. Regardless of violation, in partnership with the U.S. Attorney's Office, the FBI is prioritizing the identification, the arrest, the charging, and the detention of these violent criminals to ensure that they're not back out on the street while they await trial. We will find you, we will take you off the street, and we will ensure that you are held accountable. The FBI remains dedicated and committed to our ongoing work with the local law enforcement partners. Working together, we will address violent crime, we will apprehend criminals, and we will restore our communities. I'd like to commend U.S. Attorney Luger for his renewed focus and priority on violent crime. We look forward to continuing to work with his team. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Scott Mueller. I am the Deputy Superintendent at the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, overseeing the investigative section. I'd like to start off by thanking Mr. Luger for stepping up to lead this violent crime initiative. This is a long time coming, quite frankly. The Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension is also lending its resources to work to disrupt a surge in violent crime in the city of Minneapolis and surrounding communities. As a state law enforcement agency, the BCA is uniquely positioned to assign specialized investigative personnel who can work cases across jurisdictions. We have diverted staff from other casework in order to implement a targeted BCA team that brings the full weight of the BCA's analytical and investigative tool set to data-driven investigations so that we can quickly find and apprehend individuals. This BCA team, including nearly a dozen special agents and criminal intelligence analysts, have been in place for a month In that time, the BCA has recovered 39 guns, both rifles and handguns. We have taken on 16 major crime cases, including 5 homicide investigations, all within the city of Minneapolis. We are also pursuing individuals who have active felony warrants for violent crimes. In addition, the BCA's Forensic Science Laboratory has shifted funding and resources, logging over 800 overtime hours already this year to complete testing on evidence in violent crime cases. This effort has helped decrease the number of violent crime cases awaiting testing by over 1,200 cases. Forensic scientists and agents are also working to boost the capacity to complete testing and entry of firearms evidence into the ATF's NIBIN database. Our team will continue to work through September, pursuing known suspects in homicides, shootings, and violent crimes. We will also focus on felony warrants for carjackings and aggravated assaults. The BCA's responsibility to conduct other major crime investigations across the state does not end. And so this team will return to prior assignments in September. Until then, our BCA team is bringing these state resources and expertise to help these communities meet this urgent need. Again, thank you very much, Mr. Luger.
There are a number of cases that we want to talk about this morning that highlight our new strategy. Many more are coming, and I neglected to say when I said that I would be handling cases, I'm working currently directly with Chief Huffman from Minneapolis Police Department on a case that we'll be announcing hopefully in the near future. So on the carjacking front, we have now filed federal charges against Desmond Graham for a violent and terrifying carjacking and kidnapping. This is a ruthless case where the victim was held, beaten, and brutalized for hours. During the kidnapping, Graham actually set his co-defendant on fire. This investigation was led by our partners at the FBI and at the Minneapolis Police Department. And I can't say enough about the hard work of our law enforcement partners, including the guy who doesn't get mentioned very much from St. Paul and Chief Huffman from Minneapolis. These cases don't just turn up in your lap. They get made. Law enforcement officers work night and day to find the suspects and to bring those cases to us. Guns. We have brought federal charges against Davion Glass, a defendant with a violent criminal history. Glass has been indicted for illegal possession of a firearm. Because of his previous felony convictions, he is prohibited from possessing a firearm or ammunition. According to a law enforcement affidavit, Glass fired a weapon repeatedly at multiple people standing outside of Billy's on Grand, a bar in St. Paul. One of those bullets struck a victim in the chest. This investigation was led by our partners at the ATF and the St. Paul Police Department, and we thank them. Switches and ghost guns. We have charged Nicholas Bell with possession of a machine gun. Law enforcement agents intercepted a package from Bell sent from China that contained 21 pieces of Glock switches or auto sears. Homeland Security investigations also found that Bell had received 4 previous shipments from the same company in China over a 2-month time frame. Now, you saw what those switches can do. This man is importing and putting together switches that will end up on the street. Bell was later found with a handgun outfitted with an auto sear, 70 rounds of ammunition, and 7 additional auto sears. This investigation was led by our partners at Homeland Security Investigations, CBP, ATF, and the Blaine Police Department. One final case for this morning. Defendant Jay Olsen. We have brought charges against Olsen for possession of a machine gun and manufacturing firearms without a license, namely ghost guns. Law enforcement learned that Olsen was manufacturing and selling ghost guns, as well as selling large quantities of other firearms throughout the metro area. Law enforcement has since seized multiple ghost guns, high-capacity magazines, a silencer, several unserialized gun kits, and other firearms and accessories from Olsen. This investigation was led by our partners at the ATF, the Hennepin County Sheriff's Office, the Hennepin County Violent Offender Task Force, and the Stearns County Sheriff's Office. I also want to acknowledge, because they couldn't be here today, both sheriffs from Hennepin County and Ramsey County who are working daily with our office and with our other law enforcement partners to make these cases. I'll close with this. While we are acutely aware that prosecution and incarceration is not the sole tool for reducing violent crime, it is a critical component, and that is what we're here to talk about today. Everyone within the sound of my voice who is contemplating the next carjacking or engaged in gang activity or trafficking in illegal weapons is forewarned. These are dangerous crimes. They result in trauma, victimized communities, and you yourself may end up hurt or dead. End the plague of violence now. You have a choice, and now is the time to walk away. Federal prosecution and federal incarceration are the alternative. With the entire weight of this office and the coordinated skills of the police departments, the BCA, and federal law enforcement, we will bring justice to our communities in the fight against violent crime. We are meeting the moment. Nothing less is acceptable. And I'll take some questions. Yeah.
A lot of the language you're using sounds like, at times in the past when violent crime has been up, 25 years ago, for example, in Minneapolis. What do you say to people who are skeptical of some of the unintended consequences of, rising and costly incarceration, racial disparities in the criminal justice system? This you talked about putting everyone in prison who's charged with federally. I think it was a carjacking case?
Yeah. Adult carjacking.
People who are worried that we're going to see, some again of those unintended consequences that we've seen in the past repeat themselves. What do you say to those?
These are violent crimes. They affect people in their lives and individually. I spoke about 655 carjackings in Minneapolis alone. Every one involved a victim whose life was changed forever by that crime. I've already begun to talk to victims of violent crimes, and they all say the same thing. This was a trauma. It has changed their lives, and they've asked us to do something about it. They deserve justice, and we are doing so.
Are there any instances where your office might prosecute juveniles, given the fact that so many of these carjackings are committed by people, 14, 15 years old?
It is difficult to do. We are talking about it, but we're not there yet. Good question. Thanks.
How different is it what you're proposing that's not being done now? Like, how would you characterize
Sure.
how it is now and what?
Yeah, the biggest differences are the following. One, I don't want a situation in which ATF and the police and the FBI and the BCA have cases that fit the federal prosecution standard that we turn away because we don't have the resources available. So, the number one change was to make every prosecutor in this office available to do violent crime cases. So that's number one. That's a big change. Number two, forming a gang unit of people who will focus specifically on the most violent criminals who are involved in gangs. So that's a change. And then three, on the carjacking front, as Andy raised, we're going to be addressing people over 18, for now, people over 18 who commit carjackings and who are sometimes recruiting people under 18. And we're hoping, Andy, that this warning and this activity causes people to stop. Because up until now, the federal government hasn't weighed in fully, hasn't weighed in at the level that we are now. So those are some of the changes.
And particularly with the carjackings, and you said they're brazen in the middle of the day, they're beating up old women on their way into lungs. So
Right.
that's something I think, as a society, at least, we've seen that kind of.
And I think some people believe that carjackings are really just a form of joyriding, where maybe you take a car, you drive it a few blocks, and that's the end of it. That's not what we're seeing. What we're seeing are brutal attacks on men, women, with children in the back seat, organized, premeditated organizations engaging in this kind of activity. So it takes a lot of work. We're working right now on a case that we'll be talking about soon, where it's premeditated, it's organized. They're taking people's money out of their cell phone accounts. They are taking people's credit cards, and they're changing people's lives, and it's got to stop. What? Go ahead. Yeah, thanks.
Cases, I know that one case was because a package was intercepted, but the other ones where it's just possession, how are you guys finding out about these? Are people calling in with tips?
I'm going to turn it over to the experts.
That's a good question. Sometimes it's tips, sometimes it is informants, sometimes it is on the internet because they advertise. But most of the time we come across it when we are doing other investigations and we have recovered a privately made firearm at a crime scene, and then we'll talk to people and trace that back to where they got it from, or the person got it from.
Sure.
How many prosecutors do you have now in your office, and how many do you hope to add, or are you planning to add in the near future?
Not enough. We've got 60 prosecutors in the office, 42 of which are in the criminal division, who will all be working on violent crime cases. But we are adding a number, and that number is undefined just yet because we're working on our budget with the Department of Justice. But we're going to add a number of prosecutors, all of whom will immediately dive in to this work.
Give me, I guess, an estimate on how many you hope to hire.
5 to 8.
5 to 8, okay.
And how many do you have now?
I said 42. We have, that's all right. You got to listen to the questions. All right. So we have about 42 criminal prosecutors now. Some people, I won't go into all the details, and we're adding 5 to 8 in the criminal division.
You highlighted, some of these cases, prosecutions that you've already done.
Right.
These violent crimes. Therefore, have you noticed an impact on any of the crime statistics or trends from that already?
Good question. Too early. Too early. We'll come back to you on that after a little bit. We want to get this up and running, and we wanted to announce this to make sure that everybody in the community knows what we're doing and how serious and focused we are working together. One more?
Do you have, with fewer Minneapolis police officers on the street right now, are the feds are your agencies devoting more officers to Minneapolis particularly, where a lot of this is taking place?
I'm going to let them address that. Thanks, Andy. Sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, ATF, I have 2 groups assigned, and we have agents embedded in different units, co-command units with Minneapolis PD and St. Paul PD.
And that's more than usual?
Oh, yeah.
Let me just close with this, because Andy asked a good question. Before launching this strategy, we went out into the community. We talked to victims of crimes, but we also talked to the people who are working to reduce violence in the community, who are working with gang members, who are working with others who are being drawn into a life of violence. And the message we received from the community is that we need to do this, that this message needs to be out there, that people need to understand accountability if those who are looking to reduce violence can have an impact on the individuals they're working with one-on-one. So we think team together, this is the right strategy. Thanks, everybody.
And that criminals are
But-
more afraid of you?
Just real quick, the gentleman from the BCA talked about their efforts are going to last through September.
Right.
Is the task force going through September, or are we going to reevaluate it then?
We're going to go with the approach that we're announcing this morning. I mean, I appreciate BCA's sort of surge of resources. The rest of us are going to continue with this strategy until it is not needed. And when that day comes, I'll stand up here and tell you. Thanks, everybody.